Hey folks, Dr. Mike Israetel here for Renaissance Periodization, Nutrition Myths number 10, Losing Fat While Gaining Muscle. Oh boy. We're going to talk about the claim, why it's wrong, some silver linings as to how it could be right in some cases, and then best practices moving forward. Here's the claim, okay? It's kind of a four-part claim with a fifth clarifying part. A little bit more of a technical myth here. Claim number one is you can readily gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. There are ways in which that is true. We'll get into it in a bit. Claim number two is you can gain tons of muscle with no fat gain at the same time. Much less true. We'll get into that in a little bit. Number three, you don't have to do distinct muscle gain and fat loss phases because you can have it all at the same time in one phase. And getting in shape, gaining muscle and losing fat, isn't a kind of phasic process where you gain some muscle, but you also gain some fat, take some steps back, and then you lose some fat, but you're not gaining a ton of muscle during that time. So it's not taking steps back, but it's kind of a holding pattern until you lose the fat and then back in. It's not this phasic process of trade-offs. It's an all into results, just a linear process of you just get better, lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. And just keeps going, right? That's the claim. A lot of folks would like to believe this. And it is, in most instances, for most people who are most interested in it, more incorrect than it is correct. Okay, so this is a bit more of a nuanced one where it's not like biohacking where it's just straight up bullshit. This has some stuff to it, but that's why we're making this video, to dig into that stuff. And some important terms that we're going to be using later, and just important ones for you to be aware of. People will say lean gains. That means essentially gaining mostly or all muscle and no fat. And when they say recomping, that's when you gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. Okay, both of those are sort of the claims here. Both of them have severe limitations. Okay, severe limitations. So here are the reasons this claim, the series of claims, is wrong. We don't want to say wrong here, but highly, highly lacking. More wrong than right. Decent analogy here is if your friend says to you, like, dude, I'm a winner in the casino. Like, that's certainly true some of the time under some circumstances, but under the average circumstances and the average time, it's not true. It is not a dependable thing to think you're a winner at a casino, because you, over the long term, will lose all of your money that way. Just the same way, if you think your best efforts are spent in recomping or lean gaining and you never pay attention to intentional massing or fat loss phases, you're not getting the most bang for your buck. Most of the time, you're getting less bang for your buck than you could be. So, you can notably gain lots of muscle and lose lots of fat at the same time in a few circumstances. And here they are. One is you're not used to much or any of diet or training structure. Okay, you're a noob. Or you make your diet and training structure much more intelligent and much more efficacious than it previously was. So for example, you used to never time your carbohydrates around workouts. You start doing that. You used to eat 1 meal a day. Now you start eating 5. You used to train and sort of kind of be hypercaloric. But you didn't, sometimes your calories are really off, sometimes not. Now in a recomp, you just nail your calories every single time. You're finally eating enough protein, stuff like that. Like these big changes that, like, if you start doing more of them, you absolutely can gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, for sure, right? Another one is you're coming back to training diet from a long layoff. Like if you've been, COVID messed you up or something, you've been out of the gym for 3 months, 6 months, you absolutely, when you start lifting weights and eating relatively normally again, or just start lifting weights, you can gain muscle and lose fat notably, like seriously, a lot of impressive results at the same time. Absolutely true. If you're dipping into special sports supplements, either for the first time or taking more of them than usual, you absolutely can gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. Professional bodybuilders do it all the time, but we're not all special sports supplements, so it doesn't exactly apply to most people. And here, there's a distinction. We say notable gains. There are two terms here. Notable gains are like impressive gains that you can reliably put a stamp on and say, I'm comfortable getting these. This is a good rate. Technical gains are what are measured in studies. So a lot of people will refer to studies where they'll say, see, recomping is real, even in advanced athletes. You look at the magnitude of fat loss and muscle gain, it's detectable in the study, but barely detectable with fine-tuned scientific instruments and a huge sample of people. In an individual, applying that, you would barely notice a thing. So you could say, look, dude, I'm recomping. and then you do 6 months of recomping. If you're advanced, then you've already been doing all the things right. And you can get a DEXA or something, and it says you like lost 1% fat and gained 1% muscle. Like, were you technically successful? Yes. Were you notably successful? Well, literally no, because nobody can tell. Then you come back to the gym the next day after getting your DEXA, you're like, fellas, yeah? And they're like, what are you doing? You're like, just flexing my 1% more muscle. Should be easy to see with my 1% less fat. And they're like, you're an idiot. So yeah, you did that for 6 months and that's what happened. Cool. Technically you made gains. I don't think you're tuning into this channel to make technical gains. I think you're tuning in to all these YouTube fitness channels to make notable gains. That's what you want. So when someone tells you recomping works, they're probably right. It does work. But it doesn't work nearly as well in most cases as intentional muscle gain phases and intentional fat loss phases sequenced together, okay? So here's the deal. Other than these 3 things where you're not used to much of diet and training structure, you're coming back to it after a long layoff, or you're taking special sports supplements, if you're not in one of those groups of people, can you can definitely lose muscle and gain fat at the same time. Can you gain muscle and lose fat at the same time? Yes. But it's painfully slow and often very tough to notice at all. And if you are relatively lean, it becomes almost impossible except for incredibly rare cases. If you're sub 10% fat as a male or sub 18% fat as a female, in order to grow muscle under such restricted conditions, your body has to burn fat. It's got to be like, if you're growing muscle, but you're not gaining weight because you're recomping, you're not in a surplus, growing muscle, no weight gain, you have to burn a concomitant amount of fat. For you to have the sheer anabolic drive to gain muscle, while at the same time having the catabolic drive to burn fat and resist the catabolic impetus of getting that lean, because you guys know the leaner you get, the more your body fights against you, the more difficult it makes fat loss and the tougher it makes muscle retention. But you're not even trying to retain muscle here. You're trying to gain it while you're trying to get even leaner. Can you imagine someone being at 6% body fat, getting down to 3% fat while increasing their muscle 3%? That's insane. It just doesn't happen under almost any circumstances. So it's just not reliable. So if you're already lean, recomping is just not a bet at all. Okay, lean gains maybe, but barely. Recomping is pretty much out of the window if you're already lean and muscular. If you're not lean and muscular, yeah, it has a bit more play, but it's still probably not the best option. Here's the thing. What is the alternative? Distinct muscle gain and fat loss phases are much better. If you do one and then you do the other, in combination, you can get much further sequencing them than just trying to do lean gains or recomping the entire time. Why? Because the most profound thing other than resistance training and eating protein on how much muscle you gain is a hypercaloric condition. If you eat excess calories by just a little, it is unbelievably anabolic. And the most profound fat catabolic signal is a caloric deficit. If you create a caloric deficit, then it's the thing that burns fat. It's the most powerful fat burning machine. If you're at maintenance, you get to use 0 of them. You literally throw away your 2 best weapons. Not a good idea. Not a good idea at all. You want to use your best weapons at first to gain muscle or to lose fat, and then after you switch the script and do it again. Stupid analogy, but if you are trying to speak English and Chinese to a group of Americans and to a group of Chinese people, none of whom speak the other language, is it a good idea for you to speak in both languages at the same time? Something will be understood, but a lot will be missing. Why don't you just be like, hold up, Chinese people, and you speak to the Americans, blah, 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 blah. They're like, okay, get it. And then you speak in Chinese to the Chinese people. They're like, got it. Best of both worlds, not to be mixed. There's a lot of other things like that you don't mix. You don't mix spaghetti and cake, even though they're both good. There's a timing, there's a sequence element there. And it's much better to do distinct fat loss phases and distinct muscle gain phases, sequencing them. Once you get lean, you put on some muscle and some fat. Once you put on some muscle and some fat, you do another fat loss phase to get rid of the fat, boop, 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 so on and so forth. Then you get big and you get lean. That's how pretty much almost every, if not every, competitive large bodybuilder has done. That's the most muscular and lean people in the world do exactly and only that, right? For good reason, because it works. Trying to look for lean gains where you gain only muscle and no fat, severely restricting yourself in order to do that, or recomping to the moon is a fool's errand, because even if it works marginally, your margins could be higher if you did it another way. That's like saying to yourself, like, well, like if I want to visit my friend in a city that's 50 miles away, I can take a bicycle. Is that false? No, you can probably ride a bicycle for 50 miles if you're in normal, decent shape. It'll be super fucking hard. It'll take you forever and you'll be super tired afterwards, but you can get there. But if you also have a car, why not take the car? And someone could say, well, there's got all these other downsides. And for sure it does. Like, it's uncomfortable to gain a lot of weight and a little bit of fat. Sure, of course, that's the downside, but it's just more effective. So if you're looking for pure effect, the phasic approach is better than trying to do lean gains and trying to do recomping all the time. However, lean gaining and recomping absolutely work well for beginners especially, okay? And it's often good to just get beginners into a pretty healthy diet and regular weight training, because you don't want to inundate them with a hypocaloric diet or hypercaloric diet. Like, it's weird to get in a healthy diet and start stuffing yourself, or healthy diet and get really restrictive. You just want beginners to start with like a good, healthy muscle building diet, plenty of protein, plenty of energy, regular meals, and then teach them how to lift weights. And then you just don't even look at their body weight, right? And they normally just either in a slight surplus, slight deficit, or just on average, just keep a maintenance level intake. And then they build tons of muscle and lose tons of fat for months and months and months. And then once they don't need to press these powerful levers, but also they can't to some extent, or are less likely to, because it takes a lot of cognitive bandwidth, right? Like, it's tough enough to learn how to train and make that a habit. It's tough enough to learn how to diet and make that a habit. You don't want to push any other pedals on like force feeding them or on dieting them too hard. You just start them out with the recomposition approach, which for them works powerfully enough to be very notable, and you can just let them coast. Eventually, you'll have to take them to the next best thing, but they do gain excellent results for months without a whole lot of effort, which is awesome, especially for the beginners that can't yet be expected to put out a crazy amount of effort. Now, in the same boat, if you're coming back to diet or training, either one or both, from a long layoff of either one or both, like for example, if you have been training but your diet's just been total shit and you start eating really well, you can also recomp and or lean gain, no problem. And you just have to be aware enough to realize when the process of recomping has slowed, and you don't want to try to get into a situation where you're trying to boost your recomping abilities again. So people will say like, man, I was just eating at maintenance. I cleaned up my diet. I was training really hard. I gained a ton of muscle, a ton of strength, lost a bunch of fat in the first 6 months. In the last 2 months, it's month 8 now, it's really like I can't tell if I've gained muscle or lost fat. I think I have, maybe a little bit. The question to ask then is not, okay, how do I like relight the fire of recomp? That's not the question. The question to ask is, what should I do next? A fat loss phase or a muscle gain phase? You guys with me on that? Like, that's the next step for advanced athletes that need the most serious form of intervention. So what is the most serious form of intervention? What are these best practices? If you're a beginner to diet under training, just starting and being body weight stable for months is totally fine. Getting into the rhythm of eating, getting into the rhythm of training, and you'll get really amazing results. For sure, it works for these folks. And no, it's not your fastest fat loss. Like, look, if someone is a Hollywood star and they come to you and they're like, I have 6 months to get shredded for this role, you're not going to recomp them. That's insane. You're going to put them right into a deficit because they said shredded. You will lose fat faster in a deficit, period. There's no way to do it as fast in maintenance as it is in a deficit. If they said to you, hey, I got to have this role where I have to be in there pretty lean to start. They say I have to be much bigger and more muscular. Like, it's okay if I'm not super lean, but I have to be jacked in 6 months. You're not going to keep them at maintenance. That's insane. Like, someone says like, hey, Willem Dafoe, you got to be jacked, and you keep him at maintenance for 6 months. They're like, we said jacked. He weighs 150 pounds and he's like 6'1". What the hell's going on, right? At least 180 or something. You have to introduce a hypercaloric condition. You have to eat at a surplus. So beginners who start and stay at a body weight level that's the same at maintenance, they don't get their best possible results. Those would come if they started with fluctuations, but the bandwidth thing, and it's totally fine, it does work really well for them. Once you've gone, either coming back into training or dieting, or as a pure beginner, of about 6 to 12 months at maintenance calories, usually that's when the results start to peter out a little bit. Now, you will still make gains for years in recomp, but there's just going to be technical gains and not notable gains. They're going to be very, very slow and painful. So once you get there, you can begin either a fat loss phase or a muscle gain phase based on whichever you want first. And we're going to have other videos coming out later about which one you should pick, depending on what all these other details. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter a ton. I'll give you the TLDR. If you're pretty over fat and you don't like how you look because you have too much body fat, you just need to cut. And that's probably the best thing. Once you are relatively lean and you're at least comfortable, like, oh, I'm pretty lean, then you can bulk. But if you get after recomping, if you're like pretty lean, you can just go right into bulk. That's the short answer. This way, by doing the maintenance recomp first, and then once that process essentially runs its course as far as having notable yield and switches to just technical yield, then you go into intentional massing or cutting or intentional fat loss or muscle gain phase. And that way you get excellent results. You get the easy gains when you're primed for them. You don't have to manipulate your diet like crazy, stuff yourself or starve yourself. And you're switching to more effective intentional weight gain or loss when you can't get much out of recomping anymore, which is just intelligent, right? Like, again, the question to ask when recomping doesn't work well for you anymore isn't what can I do to make recomping work better? It's what can I do to gain more muscle and lose more fat? Because that's what you really want. And the answer there is probably dedicated phases. And it gives you the easy gains, but it also prevents you from hitting your head against the lean gains wall for too long. Too many people get, I don't want to say addicted, they get the expectation that their noob recomp is just something that's going to keep happening. And they're going to say, I started at 170 pounds, I started lifting weights, I got 12 months later, I was 170 and I had like abs and my muscles were popping out. I just want more of that to keep coming. Not a good idea. It won't. And if it hasn't, there really are no levers to pull. And now at this point, you need to either lose fat or gain weight, lose fat, gain muscle, etc. They need to be separate phases. That's how you put your best foot forward, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Give it some thought. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have a good one.